Now, if the Islam to shape the future political landscape, as we see that, and as we see that as becoming a default opposition, they want to see that indigenously rooted model that incorporates both sides. And if you look at the Tahrir Square, that picture I think can symbolize that. We have the seculars, those who are praying, those who are not praying. But you can see when the prayer time, people are staying and are praying in the big square, and they just after they're done with prayer, just picking up their banners again and just keep protesting again. But we see that Muslim Brothers trying to promise certain things. That's why they're going to be under pressure if they can deliver or not, which will give us sense to really give more conclusions about what they can really do. But it's really hard to say without seeing them in action. And also, it's going to be very immature to think that democracy is going to happen tomorrow in Egypt. It's going to be very unlikely to see a mature democracy in overnight. But institution building will take place if, let's say, the system will open up, we have more parties represented. If you have fair and frequent elections, it will take time. And the institutions will need some nutrients in terms of freedom and transparency and support. And a lot of hurdles lie ahead for Middle Eastern countries to really build their democratic institutions that can actually be successful, that can be responsive to people's needs. And also, if you look at the U.S. Middle East relationships, the United States has been really walking on the thin rope, if you will. To avoid hypocrisy, U.S. has to support democratization, because it doesn't make sense you support Mubarak. We've been supporting Mubarak, but has been critical of the Syrian regime, or we've been criticizing the Iranian regime, but not criticizing the Mubarak regime. Yeah, and we can see that right after this happening, we see the Russians are coming into the play, into the horizon, because during the Cold War, the Russians and the United States was a major battleground for ideological battleground in the Middle East. We see that the Russian president's recent visitation to Palestinian territories and our recent engagement with new Egyptian opposition movements. We see the Russians have increased their presence in the region, and we see the Turkish diplomacy is rising. Iran's nuclear facilities is a problem. Israel's security is at question. That is a pressing issue. U.S. has military bases in the region. There's a lot of things on the table. The equation is so big. So do you support democratization at the cost of certain interests, or forget about the interests and support democratization? It's a tough choice. That's why we call them geostrategic calculations will define the U.S. policies in the Middle East. And we can call them as a comfortable status quo. It was a kind of a comfortable status quo for the United States in the region, because you have the leaders who get along, you have everything is going well. The problem is they're not democratic, they're authoritarian, but they are allies. They're allies of the U.S. We see the different military bases in the region and all the other economic interests. You can do the math the rest yourself. So in the long run, what the United States should do, United States may benefit if it supports democratization with a sincere voice but follows up with action, but it's going to be costly. It's not cheap, because it is vested strategic interests in the region, which is not going to be something easy to let go. But in the long run, it can pay off. In the long run, it can be larger benefits for the U.S. interests. And supporting civil society would be the major help, financially. In particular, the civil society groups, USAID, different programs. And also the advocating Turkish model could be something of, because there is a tested case that is more or less successful that can be advocated. Now, conclusion, the idea of change will probably spread. The extent of the power of the ordinary people that we've seen a few weeks ago that originated from that revolutions will spread. It can be in the form of unrest, it can be in the form of an attitude, but again, how people think in the Middle East is not the same. The Arab exceptionalism of not being democratic has been shaken, that's why we call them the timing and the scale of unrest will vary depending on the maturity level of our opposition groups. Now, all the opposition groups have been silent, scared, weak. They'll get emboldened, get strengthened, and will get some inspiration. And we talked that the political Islam will continue to shape the socio-political landscape, and we say it's premature to jump about the conclusions about Islam and democracy and coexistence because we don't have a lot of cases that to see. We have successful cases of Turkey, Indonesia, but we need more cases to see in practice. Therefore, the fear of this Muslim Brotherhood is really unfounded because the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, is promising that will deliver civil liberties. Let them, if they come to power, if they can deliver, that's going to be confirmation. But if they fail, that's going to be the test case that the suspicions, at least, that we had could be justified. And when we see that when the Islamic revival is not accommodated, when it's repressed, when it's blocked, then we see that the democratization is severely hampered. And that's why we call that opposition movements will be under pressure to deliver. If they can deliver, they will gain credibility, and that's going to be evidence for coexistence between Islam and democracy. But if Muslim Brotherhood fails, that we'll see that there's a skepticism about coexistence with Islam and democracy. It's going to raise questions if they can really coexist, if Islamic groups are really capable of. Now, there are two kinds of people who are supporting that. Those who want to see more role of Islam, who's going to vote for Muslim Brotherhood or similar groups, or a secular who's not that religious, who doesn't care about much of religion, but they want to see change and alternative, who believe that they can do some change to the government. So there's going to be a lot of expectations, if you will, if they come to power. And that's why giving the voice will be critical in the Middle East, giving the voice to those movements. And the last chance is at minimum basic level, the current events that we've experienced that will probably the best thing that's coming out of all this is the strengthening and emboldening and revitalizing the opposition groups who needs to apply a lot more pressure on their dictators. But the quest for freedom, institutional building, just like on the picture, it's a little nice plant is coming out. It needs nurturing, it needs sun, it needs some protection from severe cold weather, alerts, and has to be protected. That can sustain later on, which definitely takes time. If you ask you what's the likelihood to elect a black president in the United States in 1970s and 60s, we're probably going to say, are you kidding me? It's probably going to be very low. But it happened in 2008 in the United States. The institution building, the maturity, permeating to political culture will take time, and we shall see it. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we can, I said hour and 10 minutes approximately, so we have 15 minutes, approximately 15-20 minutes to go, so we'll turn the floor to the questions. I'll be happy to take your questions now. Yeah, very good question. The question is, if you didn't hear, there are some cases in some countries where the case was about a young girl who was raped, was an underage girl who was raped, but was beaten by the parents and was taken to the courts, probably was a Sharia court who sentenced them to with 100 lashes. So you can see like a dating over the dead people, like where that girl should be protected, why it was the case. We can see those cases. Now, those cases are actually, could see some samples in Afghanistan. I mean, it could be some kinds that could be seen, or also could be in some of the sub-Saharan African countries as well. I cannot cite specific other countries, but yes, there were some actions of where similar practices are practiced where the Sharia law, again, that's going to be the question of institutionalization, were implemented very literally and quite often implemented very unsystematically across the board. And if you look at the age limits of, for example, the marriage, it's debated. There's no such a thing in Islam. What's going to be your date? Where is going to get married? And it can really, or the underage girls that could get married. It's a question of debate. But there are instances where like brutal cases, like in Pakistan, one boy was brutally beaten by the teacher who was not studying religious scriptures and who later died in a hospital. Those things were the literally implementations of some of the Sharia law. But you have to understand one key thing about Sharia law is very broad, and it can be very subjective applied. And when you look at the implementations, I can give you a counterexample. For example, if you look at when the Sharia law is implemented in Indonesia. Indonesia is also one of the countries where Sharia law is part of the law. Or Pakistan is another example where Sharia is a lot of law, but implementation and certain things are different. It would not probably happen if you take it to the courts in Pakistan. Probably would not happen. But I believe it could happen in countries like Afghanistan, where women are totally treated unfairly, where basically treated very, very bad. But if you look at the Islamic sources, let's say, what does Islam says about women or practice, it would be interesting what kind of women have rights. I can give some examples. Like in Islam gives rights to, if your husband works, woman can request a housemaid to clean up your house. She doesn't have to breastfeed her child. She doesn't have to clean up the house. All the property that she has, it's hers. Her husband cannot share them. Those kind of liberties but they're not practiced in reality in some of the countries. And 100 lashes of adultery. If you go try to implement the Old Testament rules, how the adultery should be punished in the Old Testament and New Testament and biblical sources, you can see some of the strict punishment sources as well, but it's not implemented. You can see there are strict restrictions in Old Testament, but it's not implemented instead of Israel, where some of the interpretations are reinterpreted in the modern days. For example, the rabbis make rulings in Israel about the certain verses in Old Testament that certain things does not apply to the modern and needs reinterpretation, reapplication. And that's why if you look at the Islam and politics, Islam does not tell what kind of government to have, what kind of system to have. It says just have a just government. So it's up to you. You're going to have a parliamentary, presidential, or what kind of court system you're going to do, and how you're going to interpret that. Adultery was implemented, or the Sharia court ruled for that little girl 100 lashes. But I can give you a specific example where the companions of the Muhammad comes to him and says openly, "Hey Muhammad, I have done an adultery. Me and this girl, we've done an adultery. Please punish us. Please give us the lashes," or whatever the rules apply to us. And Muhammad says, "Go and repent. God will forgive your sins. He is the most forgiving." But he insists, no, I want to get punished because I'm really embarrassed to go to God in this situation. And that it's implemented. So the Sharia courts can implement it very differently, depending on, and also whether it's the Shia source, which is 14% in the Islamic, or the Sunni sources, it can vary significantly. And there are radicals who justify suicide bombers. If you go and bomb yourself in the crowd in the Western world, if you kill more infidels, you will go to heaven. Yeah, that's another justification for that, because you are, instead of war, they're killing your kids and children. That's why it's fair. You can just go and blog yourself, and it's because we are in the state of war. But in the other scholars who have argued that, are you kidding me? If you kill yourself without your own veil, you're just going to straight hell with one-way ticket. And it's in the then both can justify and reinterpret from different views. So that's why the Sharia law, probably, if you can set up the implementations, it's going to be just one lecture. Maybe we can do one day just on the Sharia law, that we can talk more specifically. And all I can say with one word is the applications vary, and there is a huge need of reinterpretations, because most of the imams who do those kind of rulings are illiterate, uneducated, who I call them like this, who look at the world in a little tube, like, you sip a coffee or like a soda. What do you call it? Straw? Like with a straw. They have this kind of a straw mind where they see the world like this. That's all they see. That's how I view them. I think that's why I said it's going to be premature to jump to conclusions. Islamic world will desperately need to work on reinterpreting, and that's going to, who's going to do that? The moderate movements, like we see in some countries, that's emerging, need voice to who will do that. That's what I would say. Back there? Yeah. In other words, how the security will be the Middle East. Yeah, it is the fear. Yeah, this is, I think if I get it right. And then how about the security? Israel is alarmed when the Mubarak fell. It was alarming. The lights were not going off in the ministries at the government, because meeting after meeting, what's going to happen? Yeah, there is a concern. What if going to be all the treaties as going to be dishonored that was done with in Israel or some other countries? But there's two things to look at this. Sustaining the status quo with autocratic is unsustainable, and it's going to go. I mean, as we see that. And the only thing that's logical thing to see to support genuine democratization in the region. And that's going to be the key, genuine. And what do we mean genuine? It's going to be 3 F's, I call it, 3 F's. Free, frequent, and fair elections. Not having just fair elections or just frequent elections. Frequent, fair, and free elections that can move these processes forward. Now, let's see if you have a government who's going to be hostile to, let's say, the state of Israel, or what's going to be kick out all the U.S. military forces outside the region. That's a legitimate concern. Or what if the more radical extremist groups will come to power who can have with crazy ideas? That's a legitimate concern. But here's what I say. What we hear from the Islamist movements are, hey, if we go to power, we will deliver. We will give you a change. We'll do and we'll provide peace. We'll do that. Now, there's 2 things we can do. Well, I don't believe you. Shut up. You're not getting it, and stay there. Or, all right, come and let's see. The key thing is, without seeing them in action, it's going to be hard to premature. Now, it can go in either way. If that's why I specifically mentioned that they'll be under pressure to deliver. I mean, how they can. For example, Muslim Brotherhood has a very harsh stance against the Israel. But on the other hand, they're saying that they're going to honor some of the treaties. But I think at the end of the day, if you look at the cases for the Israel's case, at least, there hasn't been always the best choices in the Middle East, but often it has to choose one of the least best options that's available on the table. Having the more of open democracies would probably going to be better in the long term for the long term stability in the Middle East. More democratic the region are, more systematic, because it's the pattern that democracies tend to not to fight with one another. That's more of a statistical generalization we can make. Democracies don't fight with one another on a general scheme, most cases. It's more autocratic regimes are usually less stable. Because, Gaddafi, a dictator, very unstable man, he decides that's going to be the policy. It's better to have more populist things. And if you look at the hostility between Jewish state and Islamic countries, we have to go back to history too. How the Jewish and Muslim styles lived together. If you look at the history, to be a Jew was a very hard thing to be in Eastern Europe in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. Jews were persecuted, you can call it Nazi Germany, or the Russians did a lot of pogroms in Ukraine, in Italy, even France persecuted some of the Jews in back there. They could run to 2 places. It was really hard to be a Jew. You can go only 2 places when you get persecutions. And those 2 places, you can either go to the United States, to the new land, or go to Istanbul, to Turkey, the Ottoman Empire. Because and you can see that the Islamic world and Jewish country, they had a history of coexistence. So I think there will be venues of coexistence for the Jewish state and Islamic states to coexist. To work that out, I think we need more freedom and transparency. That's why the autocracies are not sustainable. That's what I would argue. Yes? I see. Very good question. And the question is, the first one, we see there's a level of organization in the protest going on for weeks, that there's a food and water being distributed. There are tents, like blankets, and there's infrastructure going on. And was it primarily provided by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt? That was the first question. Second question is and did you refer to specifically to Egypt or in general, or in some moments this seems to have no leaders? Is it a deficit, or is it a good thing, or is it a bad thing? The question, right? The first question is yes, and that's what I said. Muslim Brotherhood kind of join in a later stage in the protests to really prolong that infrastructure was necessary. Muslim Brotherhood was critical because they have charity work, they run different hospitals, they do have clinics, they set little Iraq groups. They've been doing for years and years, like for 30, 40 years. They have like a social services branch, if you will. They're used to that. I mean, they do that every day. I mean, they have lots of service like that. So it's easy for them to go and set up those organizations and quickly get the logistics going. That's why the organization was key to sustain the movement. But it was not only the Muslim Brotherhood in the streets of Egypt. There's a lot of seculars and there's Christian minorities, those who support Muslim Brotherhood, those who don't support. And if you have elections, Muslim Brotherhood will win seats, but it's not gonna be dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood in the parliament anyway. And second thing is, precisely because of their different colors represented, you don't see a clear sense of leadership there. It's a good thing in one sense. Why? Because people are united. People are united, they have different opinion, they probably don't get along politically, views, but they're there against the united dictator. It's a good thing. But in Egyptian case, well, Muslim Brotherhood has a very organized hierarchical leadership. They have a leader. Now the military set up a 10-member committee to review the constitution, and the members of the lawyers of Muslim Brotherhood are represented in that committee. So it's organized, but it can be a bad thing. Like, why we don't see the exact same of organized protests in elsewhere? There are some sporadic ones. We see in Yemen, we can see in Bahrain. Bahrain is becoming a little more, Sunni versus Shiite fight lately. But why don't we see like a similar thing in Yemen, or like very similar in Libya? It's precisely lack of organization, and that's what I say. And some will take the timing and scale will vary. Some of those leadership to organize their moves and push it forward. So it can be either it's in good and bad. It's in both sides. But they're not going to accomplish a lot if they don't have a leadership, some sort of course, a supported, let's say, leadership. Because at the end of the day, they want to have votes, and the candidates have to come out somehow to represent them. Yeah. Yes.
Would you comment on the conflict between the Sunnis and the Shias and how that affects the politics of the Middle East?
Yeah. Well, there's been historical tension when Shia and Sunni split. When it split. After the nephew of the Prophet were executed, we call them Shia and Sunni. Approximately 15-16% of the Islamic world is Shia. We can say that close to 20%, but it's definitely less than 20%. And more than 80% of the Islamic world is Sunni. And most Shia is concentrated in Iran, and half of Iraq and Bahrain. That's three major countries. Of course, there's some minorities here and there as well, but those three countries are major countries. Bahrain, Iraq, and Iran. The major tension in Iran and Iraq is they get along. Look, there's some differences, and difference is interesting. The core difference is of course, in some of the applications of Islamic law. Definitely, there's applications of Sharia law. And then also the leadership elections. In Sunni Islam, anyone can be a leader of a community, or can be elected. If anybody, society can become the president or prime minister as long as it's supported by the community. It will call it elected by merit. But in Shia Islam, the ultimate leader, we call them a spiritual leader, must come through the noble blood. We call them they have to have the descendants of the Prophet's family. So that's why we have the Ayatollahs, or the Supreme Council in Iran. In Iran, in case they have elections, president is elected, although the last one was pretty rigged. They have elections. They cannot be elected more than twice. You don't even see that in some of the Arab countries. There are some, nice institutional arrangements, but to run for president, you can be, your candidacy could be eliminated by the religious council, supreme leaders. They can just eliminate your candidacy. And that's it. If you cannot run, then what's the point of voting in some case? Because your candidacy is just totally eliminated. So there's the flaws, but that's the major differences. And there is a major thing is, again, the view of how the Islam is implemented alive is different. And there's historical, the history goes back to where they have conflict with Shiites and Sunnis. That's why Iran and all the Arab countries do not get along with each other on a large scale. It's at the more societal level and political level as well. So, Andy, question?
Could you comment on how we wanted elections in Israel and Palestine, and then Hamas got elected, which is not a friend of the U.S. Do you think that would make us worrisome of spreading free elections all over the Arab world or the Islamic world? Because the wrong people our friends might not get re-elected or re-elected. And how is the Suez Canal going to affect trade for the uprising in Egypt? And do you think that's going to make everything, all the prices go up?
You know, it's like predicting the future. I cannot predict the future. It's gonna be a speculation, or a prognosis, or making some estimates. And that's the question. That's $1 million question that everybody is asking. What's gonna happen? And the problem is, we're not gonna see without them coming. That's why. That's the immediate thing that we can at least provide, that can bet on safely, is provide those three things, as the three F's: free, frequent, and fair elections. I mean, but those three things are really critical. I mean, if you can really nail those three things down in a real sense, people can really elect that can elect. And again, and I just, Hamas was elected, and which may not be of a hostile government, or we can, you go even example. Hitler came democratically too when he came to power. And give you examples, But at the end of the day, and again, it goes back to that little picture that I have here, this little hen with the little flower. The institutional building will take time, and the new institution that's going to be born in the Middle East will be relatively new. There will need some support and nourishment, and it's going to go through its own stage of evolution, if you will. It's going to be, the Muslims have to resolve their problems, consolidate their differences. They have to work out how they're going to build free societies, how they're going to make it work. They need time. Why? Because it's been only 60 years they've been free. I mean, at least under the colony. If you look at the map of the Middle East, you see that the whole map is messed up, is in the sense that was drawn by the colonial powers. I mean, a lot of countries were made by the colonial powers. The two brothers of Hashemites, one brother becomes the king of Iraq, the other brother becomes king of Jordan. Two countries created. Let's create a little country of Kuwait. And some of the countries were drawn over a cup of coffee by the colonial powers. So there's a lot of effects that's out there, and that's why we have to overcome the time concept problem and support the democratization movement, and it's going to be a lot in the calculation that's going to come forward. And I think that's going to be it for today. And if you have more questions, I will stay a little longer, but it was a pleasure of mine to see you all today.